The Labour Party has won this general election, and I have called Sir Keir Starmer to congratulate him on his victory.
4.5 years of work changing the party. This is what it is for.
Britain's Labour Party won a landslide election victory, the biggest that it has seen in a generation. The landslide was so comprehensive, it swept the Conservative Party out of power after almost a decade and a half. It was an anti-incumbent revolt by ordinary British citizens who were sick and tired of a massive cost of living crisis as the Tories changed 5 prime ministers in 5 years. The Labour win is comparable all the way back to 1997 when Tony Blair led New Labour to a thumping win, ending decades of Conservative rule, first under Margaret Thatcher and later under John Major. Today heralds a new era in British politics. The outgoing Prime Minister Rishi Sunak conceded his party's defeat in the early morning hours. He said, and I quote, "The British people have delivered a sobering verdict tonight." Sunak was speaking to his voters from his constituency in the northern part of the country. He then said he had also called Keir Starmer, who is the leader of the Labour Party and the incoming Prime Minister, to congratulate him. He also apologized for the disastrous performance by the Conservative Party. He took personal responsibility for the defeat of his party.
I have heard your anger, your disappointment, and I take responsibility for this loss. To all the Conservative candidates and campaigners who worked tirelessly but without success, I am sorry that we could not deliver what your efforts deserved. It pains me to think how many good colleagues who contributed so much to their communities and our country will now no longer sit in the House of Commons. I thank them for their hard work and their service.
At the other end, there were scenes of jubilation at Keir Starmer's constituency. The soon-to-be Prime Minister appeared before a crowd of supporters, promising to rebuild his country. He also added that change begins now.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace, where I accepted an invitation from His Majesty the King to form the next government of this great nation.
Starmer began his speech with a big grin, but he turned more serious and somber as he talked about the need to face up to the challenge of rebuilding a broken economy and a broken public health infrastructure. Echoing the speech given by Tony Blair back in 1997 when New Labour won a landslide victory, Starmer said, and I quote, "We ran as a changed Labour Party and we will govern as a changed Labour Party." Labour had won more than 400 seats and the Conservatives just a little over 100. That would be the worst defeat for the Conservatives in the nearly 200-year history of the Conservative Party. While the Labour Party is walking away with a strong majority of seats in Parliament, the overall share of the vote that it captured was just a little over 35%. This signals a fractured electorate. It is the lowest share of vote won by any single party majority government, which is also an indication of how difficult it's going to be for Keir Starmer to govern a broken and fractured country.
I don't promise you it will be easy. Changing a country is not like flicking a switch. It's hard work, patient work, determined work, and we will have to get moving immediately.
The Conservative reversal of fortune is apparent from the so-called Red Wall seats. Now, these are a set of factory towns in the Midlands and in the north of England that for very long voted for the Labour Party, but swung back dramatically to the Conservatives in 2019. The one-time industrial heartland of England around the Manchester area and further north. This time's results indicate that many of these voters have flocked back to Labour, whose party colour is red. Labour was also helped by a strong performance by a new party, Reform UK. It's an upstart right-wing party which cut into the vote share of the Conservatives. Nigel Farage, who's a supporter of former US President Donald Trump and a known face behind Brexit, he's also one of the best political disruptors in Britain. He was elected to Parliament for the very first time. He had made 7 failed attempts in the past. Interestingly, former Prime Minister Liz Truss lost her own seat. The ousting of the former Prime Minister, the first time it's happened in over 100 years, the Prime Minister who was in office for under 2 months, is yet another sign of the scale of the Conservative Party's defeat. It was Truss's plans for unfunded tax cuts and more borrowing which roiled the financial markets. The chaos ultimately forced her resignation after 49 days, and then Sunak took over. Interestingly, a lot of the Conservative vote was cut by the Reform Party. Farage is an extremely polarizing and pugilistic figure and a highly skilled communicator. Last time, though, he had helped the Conservatives get to a landslide victory by not running candidates from his Brexit party in many key seats. This election, his plan was different. He wanted to destroy the Tories by poaching much of their vote and then replacing all of that with his own candidates.
Believe me, folks, this is just the first step of something that is going to stun all of you. Thank you very much.
Britain's current set of problems, including this massive cost of living crisis, the joblessness among young people, can all be traced back to the disastrous Brexit vote in 2016, which was championed by the likes of Nigel Farage. After 8 years of post-Brexit uncertainty, Britons want their next government to address their massive economic woes. In the 2019 election, the Conservative Party's then leader Boris Johnson won with a huge margin of over 350 seats. His promise was to finish the unfinished agenda from Britain's exit from the European Union. That unfinished business over the last 5 years has meandered from one crisis to another. The Conservative Party has governed the UK since 2010. They've had as many as 5 different prime ministers in that time. The Conservatives, the Tories, have dominated UK politics for the last decade and a half. It started with David Cameron and ended with Rishi Sunak. In between, there was Theresa May, Boris Johnson, and Liz Truss. After Boris Johnson quit office following the infamous Partygate scandal, where his ministers and his staff threw secret parties in government offices and residences while the rest of the country was locked in during the COVID-19 lockdown, Starmer, who led the Labour Party's campaign, has hailed this verdict as a new age of hope and opportunity for Britain. He has fashioned his politics much like Tony Blair and New Labour, moving the traditionally left union-backed politics of the Labour Party, moving it into a much more centrist space in a bid to try and attract independent voters. So Starmer has promised not to tax the working classes. He has said he will keep the corporate tax at 25% and not increase net migration into the UK. The 61-year-old Starmer is a human rights lawyer, he's a knight, and he has served as a legal advisor to the police in Northern Ireland. He later became England's top prosecutor. The passing of a controversial Rwanda deportation scheme into a law by the previous Sunak government, that seemed to have been the final straw in the Conservative coffin. The immigration policy that was proposed in 2022 by the British government identifies asylum seekers or illegal immigrants and then relocates them to Rwanda for further asylum and resettlement. The policy has been criticized roundly as inhumane by both Labour as well as human rights organizations. Starmer has vowed to scrap the Rwanda law on day one. When Keir Starmer moves into 10 Downing Street, he will inherit a state with public services that have been hobbled by more than a decade of budget cuts and austerity measures. A greater number of British people today live in poverty, according to the United Nations, much more than any other wealthy country on the planet. There are more Britons today on food stamps than before COVID. Real incomes have fallen while the cost of food and housing has skyrocketed. The National Health Services, the NHS, which used to be a thing of pride for most ordinary Britons, today is dealing with a shortage of doctors and healthcare workers. Many of them are frequently either on strike, and a large number of them are simply leaving Britain, going abroad for better pay. Keir Starmer has his work cut out. He will have to hit the ground running. All right, it's the biggest majority for the Labour Party since 1997, when Tony Blair led New Labour to what was a once-in-a-generation electoral victory. Many are saying that Keir Starmer's victory is once-in-a-generation too. Joining us now is Professor Tony Travers. He's from the London School of Economics, and also Lord Karan Bilamoria, who will be giving us the various factors as far as the India-UK relationship is concerned. But let me start with you, Professor Travers. What does this election result mean? Yes, of course, Labour was expected to win. It's been a decade and a half almost of Conservative rule. So yes, Labour was expected to win, but this kind of victory, 400 plus, the biggest victory seen since 1997, perhaps even beyond that, what does that necessarily mean for the politics of the UK?
Well, it's in the UK, as in India, a big majority for a political party gives them very significant power in Parliament. And although the Labour vote share was not nearly as impressive as, for example, Tony Blair in 1997, with the voting system we have, again, similar to the one in India, the same, it allows parties to build up big majorities even on relatively low vote shares, particularly when the opposition parties are split. That's what's happened here. Labour has got a very large majority, nearly as big as you say as Tony Blair back in 1997, not on a particularly large vote share. The problem for the centre-right, the Conservatives, is that their vote share was significantly split between themselves and the Reform Party, a new party to their right.
Lord Bilamoria, what may this verdict mean in the context of India-UK ties? We know that a big focus of the relationship has been on the free trade agreement, which the Conservative government was not able to sign off on. Labour has said that while they're in principle in favour of the FTA, but they do have some concerns, some clauses might need to be changed. What may the Labour victory and the manner of the Labour victory, the scale of the Labour victory, mean for the India-UK relationship? We know that Prime Minister Modi was one of the first world leaders to congratulate Sir Starmer for his victory as leader of the Labour Party.
Yes, this is an absolutely historic moment for Britain. It is, as Professor Travers has just said, this huge supermajority, almost as large, similar to Tony Blair's in 1997. And we've had a change now. The change is 18 years of Conservative government from Margaret Thatcher and John Major, 13 years of Labour, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, 14 years of Conservative-led governments now, and now this runway with the supermajority. And I think what Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, and the cabinet are going to be looking at is stability. They are desperate to generate growth. I mean, we've had in this country nothing but turmoil since June 2016, 8 years ago, with the Brexit vote. That Brexit vote was the greatest act of self-harm a country can do to itself. And we've had nothing but turmoil created by it. 5 prime ministers, no growth or low growth, low or declining productivity, a cost of living crisis. And yes, you could say some of it is caused by COVID, some of it caused by the war in Ukraine. But inflation is back down now. We need to generate that growth. And India is a major part of the UK's growth story going forward. And just now at the India Global Forum, a few days ago, David Lammy, who might be the next Foreign Secretary, you couldn't have heard it clearer how important India is to the Labour Party. Keir Starmer, who spoke at the India Global Forum last year, made a keynote speech, had an interview. I mean, how much clearer could he have made how important India is to the Labour Party going forward? Where the FTA is concerned, we could not conclude the FTA despite 14 rounds of negotiations. It's nearly there. The 4th of June, Indian elections are over. 4th of July, UK elections are over. Now's the time to conclude this FTA once and for all. And I think the Labour Party are intent on doing that. Big difference, by the way. The big difference is the Conservative Party we've had, and very disappointingly led by Rishi Sunak, and an Indian origin Prime Minister who was anti-immigration, anti-international students with a hostile approach to immigration. Labour does not have a hostile approach to immigration. When I introduced a 2-year post-graduation work visa for international students, that was in 2007, 2008, under a Labour government that I was able to persuade them to do it. The Conservatives took it away, brought it back in, tried to take it away again in May just now, and failed to take it away. With the Labour government. Things like that, promoting international students, being pro-university, having a better approach to migration as opposed to a hostile approach to migration. I think all this is going to be great news for India as well.
Professor Travers, as far as India is concerned and Indian immigrants are concerned, the Highly Skilled Migrants Program, HSMP, there's been a lot of knocking and changing around that. But it's very clear to me that whether it's the UK or to a great extent even the United States, if they want highly skilled labor, labor that's proficient in technological advances, they have to look at either China or India. Do you see the new Labour government, with all its conflicts and with all its restrictions and so on, being able to attract the best talent that is required for Britain to move or leap into the next phase of its growth story?
Well, there's no question that the UK has a relatively low and falling birth rate, and unless something else radically happens, there will have to be a level of migration into the UK every year. I think it's fair to say, Lord Boria made this point, that after the Brexit vote, the former government never really got its immigration policy sorted out. If anything, immigration rather randomly grew, making it more of an issue. So I think one of the things Labour could do to introduce a degree of rationality into the UK's immigration policy is come up with a policy that worked for countries such as India, but also worked for the UK in terms of its need for skilled labour.
I do want to ask Lord Boria, there was a time when the India-UK relationship, one of the irritants to that relationship was the two Ks. It was Kashmir and it was Khalistan. Certainly under Rishi Sunak and probably even the Conservative regimes before him, certainly under the previous Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. How do you see Sir Starmer sort of changing that nature of that relationship? Because this is a big point of contention as far as India is concerned. There are elements within the UK, within mainstream UK politics, who believe in the Khalistan cause, who believe in the Kashmir cause, that the abrogation of Article 370 was anti-constitutional and so on. How do you see that necessarily changing? Because Mr. Starmer has made all the right noises in the campaign. He said, I want to eliminate Hindu phobia. I want to have a healthy and steady relationship with India. But do you necessarily see that playing itself out under his prime ministership?
One of the things Keir Starmer has constantly emphasized during his campaign is the word change. And what he said very clearly, the change is not the change that is needed in the United Kingdom from the turmoil that we've had from the Conservative Party over the past few years, but also that he has changed the Labour Party itself. Please remember, Boris Johnson won the 80-seat majority in 2019, mainly because of Jeremy Corbyn. The country was scared of having somebody as radical, as left-wing as Jeremy Corbyn as their prime minister. That was the main reason Boris Johnson won with such a big margin. Keir Starmer has cleaned up the Labour Party. It is now much more centrist. All these impressions about Kashmir are almost a quarter of a century out of date. Things have changed now. If a certain MP representing a certain constituency that might have a certain number of people for a certain area says something, he or she does not speak for the Labour Party or the government of the day. And Keir Starmer has made it very clear where his position is, his party's, his cabinet's position is, his government's position is going to be with India, is going to be on friendly terms, both in terms of trade, but also in terms of security. And that is absolutely crucial. This has got to be a trusted relationship. It's got to be one of the most important relationships for the UK going forward, is its partnership with India. And he's now looking to 3 terms, 14, 15 years of a Labour Party being in government, building a strong relationship. And let me say this, an Indian origin prime minister, what a disappointment. He did not even take a single trade mission to India. I've been with Tony Blair, I've been with Gordon Brown, I've been with David Cameron twice, and he didn't even take one trade mission where you take cabinet ministers, the press, business leaders, university leaders, and you make an impact. We didn't do it. It's high time we did it. The last time we did it was in 2016, November. So Keir Starmer's got to show intent and go out to India with a huge delegation as soon as possible and complete that free trade agreement, and especially reassure this trust that is going to exist between the UK and India in security areas in particular and in defense.
What may those red lines be, Professor Travers? As far as Labour is concerned, they're not particularly great believers in the idea of free trade. So when you have an FTA, which has been hanging fire for a number of years now, and a lot of post-Brexit UK depends on these free trade agreements, particularly the one with India, how may you see the Labour government under Starmer sort of drawing what they feel are red lines as far as that FTA is concerned? what may be the sort of points of non-negotiation, if you will, under this new Labour government?
Well, I mean, all countries, when they're negotiating free trade deals, obviously have to protect elements of the domestic market and the politics of the domestic market. We all know that. But many countries strike free trade deals, and the UK, certainly under Keir Starmer, they said they're not going to go back into the more complex elements of the single market for the EU. So I think delivering deals with countries such as India, making it a priority, I think it will be important for Labour, partly because they said they want to boost the UK's very low level of economic growth, as Lord Boria said earlier. And they won't be able to do that without giving the impression the UK is open for business, and that means more trade deals and better trade with the EU, by the way.
Lord Boria, I'll give you the final word. What may this mean in terms of some of these hot button issues, red letter issues as far as India is concerned, whether it's Kashmir, whether it is Khalistan, which has become a bit of a sore point in the India-UK relationship? Do you see Labour under Starmer sort of taking a new position on it?
These are areas that India is very sensitive to, and rightly so. I think that Keir Starmer has got to lead positively on the front foot and demonstrate to India that he means business and will treat India as a trusted partner. And look at what has happened. We used to be the second largest recipient of Indian investment in the world. Because of the economic turmoil we've had over the last few years, we have slipped way down. Now, in generating growth, which is their priority, which will then generate jobs, which will then generate taxes, which will then pay for the public services and help this country, that's what's needed. And that investment that comes in, India is already a large investor in the UK. The potential is huge. Our trade is only £39 billion bilaterally. It's a fraction of what it should be. We need to boost it, and the Labour Party can get behind it, and I'm confident that they will.
All right, Lord Boria, Professor Travers, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us and putting into perspective what this election victory means for the Labour Party, what it necessarily means for relationships with India, among other big economies right around the world, and most importantly in the context of the free trade agreement which has been negotiated between India and the UK, which has been really hanging fire for the last 5 years under the Conservative rule. We hope that moves in a definitive direction under the new Labour government.